All right, now I have another great honor, and that great honor is to introduce our next keynote speaker, friend and mentor, Dwane Lay. Dwane Lay is the head of HR process design for Dovetail Software, a leading provider of HR case management and employee request management. You might have seen him around the conference. He's just a little shy, just a little shy. He has over 15 years of HR and leadership experience and has helped numerous organizations overhaul their practice and processes and technology. He also presents a variety of topics to professional audiences and is author of Lean HR blog.
That's true.
Do you want to do this?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
You're doing great.
all right,
You're doing great.
right. He is recognized.
I've never heard most of this stuff, so it's interesting to me.
Yeah, he is recognized as a leading authority on the application of lean tools and techniques in human resources, as well as having a wealth of experience in applying business technology.
Yeah, why not?
To improve HR processes. He is a well-known presence in the HR social media landscape. Dwane holds an MBA from Lindenwood University, as well as having earned a
Go ahead, keep going. You can get there.
Uh-huh.
It's been a long conference.
Yes, has. Six Sigma Black Belt and is a certified senior professional of human resources with HRCI. HRCI, I'm done.
That's the Canadian version.
I am done.
HRCI, eh?
I am absolutely done. And also, very, very important, Dwane will be doing a book signing right after his keynote. And now I am done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, so let me, since I got to do their awards, I want to do a little housekeeping of my own now that I have the stage. First of all, there is, I'm going to say, a greater than 60% chance you will see a man die here in the next hour because there is no chance I am not falling into this giant hole. There's candy right there, though. Notice there's like doves and Yorks and awesome. All right, so on my way down, I'll throw something out. One of my favorite things about doing these kinds of shows is I seem to be the one who gets to come on after awards, doesn't matter the time slot. And I love seeing that. I love seeing our community recognize each other. And that's like heartwarming for me. So I'm really, really glad to get to see that. And I'm going to pander just a little bit. Getting to see members of the military here in the second row is, to me, I get a little chill from that. My father was a Green Beret. So thank you very much for your service. We love you. Appreciate you. And to be frank, it's a little intimidating. I just want you to know that. So if I tend to be looking over there, it's not personal. Also, John Jorgensen is in the back, and John has this really great habit of telling us what every day of the year is. Today is an HR holiday. I don't know if you're aware of this. It is National Bacon Day. So please make sure you get your fill before you leave the show. Okay, I think that's it. So let's get started. So hi, I'm Dwane. There was one last thing. I am more thrilled to be here than you could possibly imagine for a couple of reasons. The previous two keynotes, Laurie and Chris, and then Dan Crosby, are friends. I got started watching them, and to me it's thrilling to get to share the same stage as them. So I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed their stuff. I feel smarter when I listen to those three talk. So to me that was really important. But more than that, and there's only a few people that know this, Illinois SHRM is where I got my start. So my first big conference speaking event was here. So I have told this team, anytime you need me, you just call out my name, and I'll come running, oh yeah, to see you again. All right, enough. So anyway, so thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. So I'm a recovering IT geek. I grew up in IT. I got into HR about 10 years ago. It's a long story that's not terribly interesting, and I suspect other people have similar ones. But I love HR, and I'm fascinated with it, not just from a functional perspective, but from a process perspective. I like pulling things apart and kind of rebuilding them. And so when I started looking at the culture piece, I thought, there's a process piece of this that we can get into. There are things we can learn here that can help us go back and actually take action and do some interesting things. So that's what I want to talk about. To get started, though, I want to talk about this. So there are two boys that live in my house. They're 10 and 6, and if you have boys that age or have ever had them, you realize that they run the house. I don't make many decisions. So not too long ago, the boys said, we'd like to get a pet. And if you've ever had boys who are 10 and 6, you recognize that they are in no way responsible enough to have a real pet. So I said, let's get fish. And because their brains are still tiny, they fell for it. And they're like, fish sound great, Dad. So this is our aquarium. This is the actual one. My son designed this like a fake volcano, Pompeii kind of thing. And we put the fish in, and it was great. And I don't know anything about fish, so I got some books and I read because I'm a dork. And I set up this fish tank. And everything was good for a couple of weeks. And then the water started getting really cloudy. Like all the fish, I hear people laughing like, oh, that's what happens. You don't know what you're doing with fish. But it's like they were sneaking cigarettes when I was in bed, right? And so what do? I go read more books. And I'm trying to, you got to cycle the water, you got to change the filter and change the temperature, and I do all these things. None of it works. And then I find there's this stuff called water clarifier, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. And it's like an employee engagement survey. You just drop it in place, and everything will be good. We'll clear it right up. So I did, and you're supposed to put, it's 1 drop per gallon. So because this is, again, I'm a black belt, they break your brain, and you think things the wrong way. So I immediately, how much like fluid ounces would 30 drops be so that I don't have to do a drop at a time? I can just measure it out each time, and I'm faster at it. So I did that, and I went on for a couple weeks, and amazingly, absolutely nothing happened. I treat it every day, I do everything I'm supposed to, nothing changes. So then one night, I'm headed to bed, I'm like, I gotta do this, and I didn't have time to get the measuring spoon, so I'm like, I'll just pour some in, it'll be fine. You guys know where this is going. So you know how on some salad dressing bottles, like there's a little thing where you just do that, and then you squeeze in a little bit, and other ones you gotta take the cap off, and the little round thing's on the inside? Right? You with me? Okay. This had the little flippy thing, but I'm like, sleeping, so I take the cap off and I turn it over. Right. So I dump like half a bottle of this stuff in. Here's the good news. This is actually a fairly recent picture. It did clear up the water. The water is crystal clear now. See, you're here in the future with me. I appreciate that. So I dump this in, and I can see this cloud of destruction like trickling down, and all the fish scatter because they know what's up. And so I'm like, that's no good. So I grab a bucket and I get some water, and I'm trying to get the fish out, and they're running because they're ungrateful. And I get them out into this other bucket, and then I realize, no, that's the bad water. That doesn't work. So I got to dump that water out and put them in another thing. So it is clean. It is clear. I did kill all the fish. The good news is my boys are 10 and 6. They have tiny brains. And so they're like, where are all the fish, Dad? I'm like, we're cleaning the tank. We had to take them back to the fish store. They're going to hold on to them for us for a while. And now, what's funny about it is when there's fish back in that tank now, they have no idea. Even though the fish are all different colors and sizes and different, like that one's it's an algae eater. Did we have one? We totally had that before. Oh, yeah. But here's the thing about it, and this is why I tell the story. What's fascinating to me about it is that fish don't realize they're in a cloudy tank. Right? Fish have no idea what kind of water they're in. Just like employees don't realize what kind of culture they're in for the most part until it's really bad, until you start killing them off. I should be really clear about this. I do not recommend you kill your employees, okay? My lawyers have advised me I need to make that disclaimer up front. Do not kill your employees. But eventually, they're going to jump for freedom, right? So the key to us is to recognize, how did this tank get so cloudy? What happened to our environment? How did it get where it is? What are the components that are going into this, and how do we fix it? The bad news is that change is really hard. And the really bad news about this, and I want to tell you this up front, is you cannot make a decision about what your workplace culture will be and then go implement that. You can't just decide, our culture is going to be more friendly towards pets. Done. There's work that goes into it. There are opportunities to change culture. We've seen it happen around the world, right? New York had this amazing run of a couple of years where they reduced violent crime and property crime significantly over a 2-year period. Anyone who pays attention to business knows Melissa Mayer has made some significant cultural changes at Yahoo since she's taken over there. They may not be looked at as positive, but they're clearly having an impact on the way that business runs, right? Y'all get free food, y'all get a free phone, and then you can't stay home anymore because all the food and phones are here, okay? That has significantly changed their workplace. This is why I love Illinois SHRM. Nobody ever laughs at my jokes. Thank you so much for coming with me. It's not going to get better, so I'm glad you're doing it up front. Nationwide, this is one of my favorites. In 1 year, 16,000 employees, they made huge strides in becoming recognized as a leading company for the gay and lesbian community, being inclusive. That kind of stuff doesn't happen just by saying it, right? There's work that goes into that stuff. So yes, you can change the workplace culture, but you can't just decide this is what our culture will be, okay? So here's the good news, and any of you who are process geeks like me, and I'm assuming it's just me, have seen this before. This is my favorite slide in any deck I ever do. This is called the process equation. If you dig this kind of stuff, come to my session this afternoon. We're going to talk a lot more about it. But you'll already know this part, so I can skip it then. So the process equation, This is how everything runs in the world. It's a pretty powerful slide, right? How everything works. In this case, what we're saying is our Y is our output of goods, services, experiences, whatever. The X are the inputs that go into any process, and the F is the function, how all the inputs work together. Everything we do in life is a process. Your experience today is a combination of inputs that have to do with your breakfast, what time you got up, the temperature in the room, whether or not you got one of these great awards up here. All of those things go into the experience you're going to have today. That experience is an output. Culture is an output of a lot of inputs. There are a lot of things that go into building culture, and we're going to talk about what they are. How do we identify them? How do we build off of them? The bad news about this, though, is that F, the function, is actually really squirrely. You cannot predict how these inputs are going to work together, not with complete accuracy. So while we can do our best to make changes to it, we'll never have full control because of that function, all right? But the really nice thing about the process equation tells us we do have to recognize what the inputs look like and change them, because if you never change the inputs, you will never change the outputs, right? Hope is not a strategy. Really needing it to be better doesn't do the job. So again, from a process perspective, we start pulling it apart and go, well, what makes up culture? How do we know what to go influence? So this is a tool called a Y to X tree. We're not going to do like root cause analysis stuff today, not this morning anyway. But this is a Y to X tree, and it's just a basic way to say, well, we know the Y, and we know it runs through a function, but what are the X's? Like, how do we pull this thing together? How do we know what it is that's making up our output? So what's interesting about culture, there's been a lot of studies done, and in fact, you could get 100 anthropologists together, and you ask them, like, what makes up culture? And you'll get a bunch of different answers. At least one of them will be, like, you should go talk to a sociologist because anthropologists don't know anything about culture. Sociologists are like that. They just don't like to answer questions straight up. But the studies will tell you there are all these things that go into it, right? We talk about trust, civil discourse, employee barbecues, right? Very important. Money, power, tenure, profit, all of these things. These are not part of your culture. These are not your X's. Okay, these are other outputs. Anyone who knows the difference between correlation and causation will see this. Those are the things you find when you have a healthy culture. But just doing those does not make your culture healthy, right? That's like saying Google gives people free cars. Maybe if we give everyone a free car, we'll be as successful as Google, right? It's correlation, not causation, okay? Here's the good news, is that we have identified, I say we, like I was part of it, other smart people have identified what we consider like the 5 building blocks of culture. These are the really important ones. We talk about norms, values, symbols, technology, and language. We're going to go through each one of those and kind of talk about what they mean. But these are the 5. These are the ones we're going to work on. So we start with norms. Norms are your expected behaviors, all right? This is how you're expected to act in the workplace. They are the things that tell you if you're right or wrong in your motivations, okay? We all understand what norms are. That's a pretty, I think, common concept. It's the way we act with each other. What's really interesting is there's some research done by this gentleman, Robert Wright, his book, The Moral Animal. He talked a lot about meta-norms. And meta-norms are like, kind of like the super ego to the ego. It's a level up. It's a level higher, right? Norms tell you how you're expected to behave. Meta-norms tell you how you are expected to behave when other people violate norms, right? I don't know who made that noise, but I'm with you. So as an example, we talk about Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was an interesting cat. You may have heard of him. Wrote a few books. And he was married to Catherine Dickens for, I think it was 16 years. And then he met Ellen Turner, an 18-year-old actress. He was 41 years old at the time. And he fell in love with Ellen and not so much with Catherine anymore, right? Spent the rest of his life with this, at the time, 18-year-old. Eventually she grew up. This 18-year-old actress. What's interesting about it is that he never publicly acknowledged this relationship. In Victorian England, you're not allowed to go leave your wife of 15, 16 years and run off with an 18-year-old actress, right? But all of his friends and family, had he gone public with this, would have faced so much pressure to cut him out of their social circles, to ignore him, to shun him. He didn't go public with it because he didn't want to put that pressure on them. Right? Those were the meta-norms, how they were expected to react based on what he had done. I think it's probably safe to say that generally speaking, a dude who leaves his wife of 16 years at the age of 40 to run off with an 18-year-old actress is going to be looked at a bit askew. But if that happens in your family, that's just crazy Uncle Todd. That's not a dude that you're not allowed to talk to anymore, right? Meta-norms are a lot more powerful than norms, but they're also more malleable. They change faster. And it's really interesting to look at our culture as a society and look at the impact those meta-norms have and the way that they change. There are things that happen in the workplace every day that we know are wrong, right? But what do we do about them? When people misbehave in the workplace, I mean, maybe they get called into HR for a talk, right? But how often do you really come down on people? It's, you shouldn't harass your secretary, or you should work a full 8 hours if you're going to get on the time clock. All these kind of things that we know are supposed to be happening, and yet they seem to keep going on. We even have, banks that go out and melt down our economy and then hand out billions of dollars in bonuses the same year. And we do not, as a people, grab our torches and pitchforks and storm their castle. Of course it's wrong. Of course they should be strung up by their heels, but it hasn't happened. The meta-norms have softened. We've become used to it. So even though we still know it's wrong, even though the norms still exist, it's like they're not quite as powerful to us as the meta-norms that allow it to go on. Okay? So we think about that when we're looking at our workplace culture. It's not just how you behave, it's how you behave towards people when they behave good or bad. Okay? The next one we talk about is values. Values are the reasons you're supposed to behave in this way. Now notice, neither one of these talk about your actual behavior. Just what you're expected to do and why you're expected to do it. Those are the pieces, because behavior is an individual concept. Values are really interesting when you look at it from a group perspective and the way that people work together. So we've got these 6 gentlemen on the screen. 3 of them widely heralded as great leaders, right, who led people in the charge of good and all that is righteous to save the world. And 3 dudes you look at and think, how did they convince so many people to follow them when they were clearly so out of whack? When the truth of the matter is they all did exactly the same thing. They had powerful ideas, powerful words, and they convinced people to follow because people tend to follow. Values very quickly get swallowed up by a group. Okay, so when we get later in the presentation, we're talking about individual actions. This is a big, big piece of it. We tend to follow in groups. We tend to identify in groups. We also tend to hate in groups. As an example, let's talk about lawyers. Lawyers are horrible. Are there any lawyers here before I jump into this? No? Right on. So lawyers are horrible, right? I mean, nobody wants to deal with lawyers. Their time sucks. They're horrible. We don't like. But I'll tell you what, I have a dear friend, Heather Bussing, who's one of the nicest people I've ever met. She's gracious, she's charming, she's giving, she's talented. She just happens to be a lawyer, right? We hate groups. We don't hate individuals. So as we learn to recognize people and get away from looking at like the faceless mass that's out there, especially when you're looking at social networking and all your Twitter followers become one place where you just broadcast your messages at, when we start to see the individual, we start looking at the dude in the yellow hat, right? The message changes. Our behavior changes. So seeing those individuals is a big part in recognizing how we treat each other on a daily basis. The next one is symbols. So this actually is really important. This is a little disclaimer I need to make. Any of you who are here with your boss, your peers, or your direct reports, it's really important for the next 2 minutes that you continue looking directly up here, okay? Any job you've ever had that you hated, people you had to work with were difficult, you didn't care for your boss, you didn't care for your direct reports, there's a weight that follows you into that office every day, right? That Sunday night, the load comes back to your shoulders because you got to go back in. So we've all had those jobs. So think about those jobs for a second. Close your eyes, just imagine it in all its glory. And then think about the logo of that company and tell me if those feelings stay the same or change. The symbolism of a company, their logo, is really powerful stuff. It's amazing. These companies, I hope nobody's here from any of these companies are regularly voted some of the worst to work for, right? And even just seeing HP makes me a little angry, right? I'm a Mac boy. You guys know that if you looked up here. But it just makes me angry because I think of all the things that have gone wrong, right? All the things that their people have gone through. That symbolism is incredibly powerful. The message that it sends, it's anything that stands for something else, and these symbols end up standing for a lot of things. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous showing this next slide, so just stay with me. That is a really powerful symbol to us, right? But why? Because we love cotton? Because we hate fire? No, because of the symbolism, because of what it means to us. It's visceral, right? This is the power of symbolism. Would it be as powerful a symbol if it was just somebody setting shoes on fire? No, it's crazy. What if it was just like books, right? It's amazing where you can find the power of these things. And just thinking about this should help you when you look around your office, you look around your workplace, and look at the symbols you use. Things like posters. They don't have to be visual. Who gets stock options, right? That's a symbol. That means something to people. All right, so think about how you use those symbols in your workplace. The best example I've ever seen, speaking of being a fanboy, Steve Jobs was revered by the legions, right? We loved him. He was the closest thing we've ever had to a real Tony Stark. Years ago, right? So years ago, he gets up on stage. I imagine he did it a lot like I do. Standing over the yawning chasm. He gets up on stage and he announces, hey, Apple's not doing so great, but we've got a partner who's going to come on board. They're going to give us this huge influx of cash, and they're going to make available for the first time to Mac users everywhere the most popular suite of office software on the planet. And he was booed. By his own fans, they booed him. How dare you keep that company afloat and give us operating software that we can use across the world? Right? Bill Gates giving away his money and solving malaria. Boo! But it's the symbol. It's the symbol is what grabs people. I have worked for organizations that decided we're going to change the name of this department because everybody hates us. It's a true story. I worked for one. I swear to you this is true. I worked for this big company, and we had enterprise services, right? And it was IT and HR and finance, and everyone hated them because they were really bad at what they did. That's not fair. They just were bad to everybody who needed them to do something. New VP came in, day one, we're changing the name to Shared Services. Why? Well, because enterprise services meant something to people. Shared services meant nothing. They got to rebuild the whole structure from the ground up. And what's crazy about it is it worked. When people stopped seeing ES and started seeing SS, for some reason, it made a difference. They were okay with it. They were willing to give these people a chance. So don't forget about the power of those symbols, of the words, the sounds, even the scents. Who's it? Is it Abercrombie and Fitch when you walk by and you smell it? Like, that's a symbol for them. That means something when you smell that. Technology, the way that we use technology and the way that you deploy it in your workplace says a lot about trust, about power, about information. What's really interesting to me is the intersection of language and technology, and we'll get to language next. My kids have never, ever seen this. But when we're in the car and it's hot, what do they want to do? Roll the window down. It's this. It's a flick the window down. It's roll the window down, right? How many of you have a camera phone with you right now? Don't put your hands up. I know it's all you. Despite the fact you all haven't been taking pictures of me for some reason. I get blinded by flashes. Thank you. What is the noise it makes when you push the button and you have the sound turned on? There's no shutter in that camera. Why is it making that noise? Because it's simple. It's what we've come to expect. It means somebody took the picture. It means there's not just like a little goblin with unicorn dust painting a picture on the inside of your phone. That's how you know it works. I worked for an organization that said everyone comes on board must have a BlackBerry, which is why, Laura, yesterday when you mentioned BlackBerries, I laughed a little bit because I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about those again. And they said, okay, so welcome aboard. Here's your BlackBerry. I said, oh, no, I've got an iPhone. I'm good. Mine actually gets calls and emails. It's fine. And they said, no, you don't understand. Everyone gets a BlackBerry. Here's yours. And I said, yeah, but and now the process guy kicks in. But wait, you're going to spend like $75 a month plus hardware costs plus internet fees. And I have something that works perfectly fine that I'm willing to just pay for so my life is easier. Maybe you could just keep that BlackBerry. They said, I don't think you understand. Everyone gets a BlackBerry. Here's yours. So I took the BlackBerry, and I forwarded it to my iPhone, and I threw it in a drawer. And there it stayed until I left that organization. Never picked it up again. But it's you don't get to make your own choices about your technology. This is what you're going to use, right? That says something to us. How many of you filter and or throttle your internet at work? Or, we'll just go crazy, block social media sites from your employees? Okay, I can see one hand, but I'm like right in the spotlight, so all right. But here's the thing, if you block those sites, people are social. You cannot stop them from sharing with others. They all have phones. Right? They'll get on their phone or on their tablet and get online anyway. If not, they'll do it when they get home. Right? What you're doing is just making it more difficult to them. You don't trust them with that information. If you employ humans, they are going to be social at some point. And if you only employ robots, the singularity is coming, and then you will be sorry. Wow, no one ever laughs at that joke. Thank you so much. All right. So language. Language has really powerful meaning. And the way that you use the words and what you do with them can either build credibility or destroy you. I worked for this organization where transformation was a big, big word, right? We are going to transform human resources. Has anyone ever worked on a project like this? Don't put your hand up. I know it's all of you. We said, great, let's transform. So I joined this team. They said, what we want to do is we want to change the way HR operates. We want to be bigger, stronger, faster. What can we do? Because I'm a process nerd, I said, all right, well, let's do our Y to X tree. Let's break this down. We've got an HR team. What are the inputs going into here? Well, we've got some managers. We've got generalists. We've got some recruiters. We've got the tasks. We've got the employees. We couldn't change the employees, well, not more than one at a time. The work was the work, so we had to look at the team. I was very fortunate that my talent acquisition manager, who had never worked in talent acquisition in her life, I was able to shift her into a different role where she was really good and go out and find someone who knew how to recruit. I will tell you, I've worked in HR a long time. I am not a recruiter. I get it. I've done it a little bit, but recruiters are a special people, right? They're like the pirates of the business world. They dress a little nicer than the rest of us. They kind of have their own language, right? They're a little dangerous, and their job is to go steal all the good stuff from other companies. Recruiters are really valuable people. So I managed to find somebody. I managed to find this guy that I thought would be a perfect fit. He and I got along great, right? Our language was synced up. We're the same with technology and all these different pieces. But he was very different than the rest of the team because he was a recruiter. I'm like, this is what I need. This is my guy. He had been an executive headhunter. He had trained other headhunters. I'm like, this is exactly what I need. I have an interview with my boss, and she's like, yeah, he's fine. Whatever you want to do with it, I'm good with it. I have an interview with my recruiters. They're like, we love this guy. He's amazing. And he came back and said, your recruiters are horrible. You know, they spent an hour just telling me how much they hate their jobs. Like, they didn't ask me any questions. They just wanted me to tell them everything would be okay. I was like, yeah, okay, good. This is perfect. So I'm ready to hire this guy. We're going to make a change. And my boss says, yeah, well, I just, have him interview with the management team, with your other peers first. I said, why? We're HR. Like, this is our job. Like, finance doesn't come for us to look over their budgets. This is our world. She said, no, just do me a favor, just cross the T's, dot the I's, just go ahead and do it. I said, okay. So I introduced him to our management team. And he comes back an hour later, and I send him on his way, and I go to meet with him, and I said, what did you think? And they said, oh, no, we hate him. And I said, why do you hate him? So I made this nice little chart so I could see why they hated him. I swear to you, the first one is a true story. Someone complained about his choice of socks. Look, hey, I'm a sock guy, right? I'll admit it. Somebody actually said, I don't like his socks. What is wrong with you people? So, well, we don't think he has the skills that we need. I'm like, you don't have any idea what he's going to be doing. Well, he's not the kind of person we've ever hired before. And there it is. He's not the kind of person we've ever hired before. He's exactly the same as what we've never hired. And he's nothing like what we've always hired. And now, suddenly, that word transformation means nothing. Change the why, but don't touch the X's. Don't make us uncomfortable. It doesn't work. That's the power of language. I didn't make this up. You guys have seen this 1,000 times, right? But it's true. The words lose their power if you don't follow them up. But if you have them, if they're part of your world, they can be a big, big tool. Okay? So you have to respect the power of that language. So those are the 5. So now we're in the part of the program where I'm going to give you the secrets of how to go change your culture. Are you ready? You have your notes out? Run on. I love this. Okay. The first thing, employee engagement surveys, they're really important. What you have to remember is that you have to spend a lot of money on these with a lot of consultants. It's very hard to do. That's why none of them can agree on what employee engagement means, right? So it's important you spend a lot of money on this. Number 2, I think swear jars are fantastic in the office. If you can make everybody put in a quarter every time they say a blue word, they're great. Put them in your meetings. They send a strong signal. Posters in the hallway are amazing. If you can put cats on your posters, it's even better. Employee picnics, if you get everybody together for those. Okay. This is, at least at some point, like, people start giving me the looks on these, right? Now, these are nonsense. And we all know that. But yet, this is what we keep doing to ourselves. Think of the money we've spent on this nonsense, right? So there's a wonderful book called Freakonomics. Anybody read this one, Freakonomics? Okay, only a couple of you. I swear to you, I will not be offended if any of you get up and leave to go to Barnes & Noble and get a copy of this book. Like right now. Please don't. But if you did, I'd totally understand. Freakonomics is one of my favorite books on the planet. And it's just a lot of interesting stories written by an economist and a journalist kind of looking at the world and how things happen. And they start off by saying, yeah, there's no unifying theme to this book. There's just some things that we found interesting. Then they wrote a second book called Super Freakonomics. You notice I don't put that slide up. Because the only really good thing was the introduction. But they said this. They said, we realized we lied to you in the first book because it turns out there is a unifying theme, and it's this. I'll give you the short version. People respond to incentives, just not always in the way you would expect or want them to. It's that law of unintended consequences. The function, that squirrely little f in our process equation, is what pulls us apart. This is really powerful stuff. It's a fabulous book. I mean, if you want to see incentivizing, incentives, any of those words, if you want to see them in action, read this book. Or they did a documentary of it where they actually like film it. So really, really interesting stuff. And I told you we wouldn't do root cause analysis in here. If you want to meet up in the bar later on, we'll do some lighthearted spreadsheeting. We'll get together on it. Or again, I'm doing a session later. We can talk about it then. But the really good news, I think, the really interesting thing, is that we know that we can change behavior. It's been proven mathematically. Is that something you're interested in hearing about? Good, because I'm doing the slides anyway. All right. So there's these three dudes, John von Neumann, John Nash, Albert Tucker. They were pioneers in game theory. And game theory is all about how people interact with each other and how we make decisions. John Nash, the fellow in the middle, you may think he looks a lot like Russell Crowe. That's why Russell Crowe played him in the movie A Beautiful Mind. So there's a lot of different components of game theory, but the one I want to talk about is this exercise called the prisoner's dilemma. And essentially, it's a way of looking at how people tend to behave in their own self-interest when behaving in the interest of the group is actually better for them. Okay? So this one's a little complex. I'll try to make it easy as I can. So we've got two people who get arrested for the same crime. The police don't have enough information to put them both in jail. So they make them an offer. They tell them both the same thing. If you will rat out your friend, if he rats you out, you'll each go to jail for 5 years. If he stays quiet, he'll go to jail for 20 years and you'll go free. If you stay quiet and he rats you out, you'll go to jail for 20 years. And if you both stay quiet, then you'll each get a year on a lesser sentence. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this is that in both cases, when you look at this, the best option is to keep your mouth shut. Right? That's how you turn out better, is for everyone to keep their mouths shut. That's at the group level, right? You get 2 years total here. If you both talk, there's 10 years total up there, 20 years, 20 years. The best option is for everybody to keep their mouths shut. That's how it works in real life, right? And if you who grew up with brothers and sisters know that. Mom comes and asks you, you keep your mouth shut. My sister always ratted me out, so. But what's interesting is people tend to behave in their own self-interest. They say, well, but I got a shot at getting nothing if I rat them out. So what happens? They turn on each other and they both go to jail for 5 years, right? We tend to act in our own self-interest even when acting against our self-interest is way better for the group, okay? Here's why this is important. So this lovely-looking gentleman, Robert Axelrod, he was part of this experiment they did where they allowed people, this back in the 70s, he was a political scientist. They allowed people to build essentially an artificial intelligence program to run through this simulation of the prisoner's dilemma. And they said, we want to see what kind of behavior sets give us the best result. The result being the fewest number of years spent in jail for each program. All right, so they're like fake people. And the one that won the competition was called tit for tat. Okay, it's pretty simple. Is every time it met a new partner, it would cooperate with that partner. Every time it met that partner again after that, it would just act however that person acted last time. Okay? So it always leads with cooperation. It always leads with the open hand. But then whatever that person did last time, that's how you're going to act to them. Right? So this is the behavior model that, we cooperate. As soon as they defect, right, when they turn on you, you turn on them. So there were a lot of different behavior models took place. This one, by far, was the most productive when it came to the fewest number of years in jail. So what does that tell us? We know, based on these simulations, and a lot of research going into them, that this is the behavior set that will drive the most change. Lead with the open hand, right? We keep the fist back here just in case. So the power of this then is like looking at your network and figuring out, like, how do you take your own behavior, how do you change it, and how do you use that principle and how you interact with people on a daily basis to change the culture overall. Another gentleman who did some great research on this, John Goldhammer, talked about the power of groups and how groups interact and how we can leverage individual activity to kind of break out of these group cycles, which is essentially what culture becomes. So we're going to look at some of those things, the things you actually can do for serious this time, the things you actually can do to go change your culture, all right? But I'll warn you up front, it's a pretty lonely road, okay? Because it is based on individual activity. It is things you are going to have to go do differently. Nobody wants to be the one to have to pick up the phone and make the call when you're fighting with somebody, right? You don't want to be the one, hey, I didn't start this. Why should I be the one to make the phone call? Because you do, all right? As an example, there's this thing that I like to talk about called social inertia. When you're in a group, it's really dangerous to be the one who takes individual action, okay? Good or bad, the one who steps out of that frame is the one who takes all the risk. As an example, we're all here together. We're all spending some time together for a while. If Marin Hogan decides to get up and walk out in the middle of the session because she's had enough of my nonsense, you know what? Hang on. If Marin Hogan decides to get up and give me a standing ovation at the end of my session, suddenly it makes it okay for everybody else to do so, right? But it's that first person that drives it. You saw it in action with the awards. We're giving off names. We're talking about each other. The first time you hear somebody clap, what do? Oh, we're clapping now. Time to clap. And you wait to hear somebody else stop clapping. Time to stop. Right? In the group, it's powerful, the safety, right? But being the one who takes a different action, it's a tough road. I was working with my team, actually. It was me and Steve Jobs and the guy from Point Break. Anyway, so we were doing this workshop. Our VP was leading us. It was a creativity workshop. It was really fantastic. And I hate to say this because I have to get up and do these kind of things now. But this guy, I mean, he was horrific. And it started, interestingly enough, that we had, like, he showed us this video from like 1973 of some class he had done, and people were all excited. And he had all this marketing material, people like wearing his t-shirts, and yay, we're having a great time. It was fantastic. We're like, good. But then it was like this really difficult process to go through, and no one was really engaged. And our VP was actually, it was funny, she was from Brussels. She was like this tall, but like one of the most fierce women you'd ever meet. And she was a fantastic leader. We loved working with her. I remember halfway through day one, we're all headed outside for lunch, and I happened to walk past her talking to one of her direct reports, the guy who booked this. She goes, I hate him, and I blame you. Right? He shushed her at one point, which is where we knew it all fell apart. Ironically, she was saying, I can't hear him. And he looked at her and goes, shh, I'm talking. Like, not the way I do it, like joking, like he was serious. We were like, oh my gosh, she's gonna kill him right now. And she didn't, so we were stuck there for another day and a half. Again, I do not advocate killing your facilitators or your trainers or your speakers. Let me be crystal clear on that. So we went through this day and a half, and we didn't really learn a lot. It was a lot of waste of time. But what was interesting is at the end of it, he rolls out these t-shirts that we had seen all of these other people put on. They were all happy to wear the t-shirts. And we were like, those weren't smiles. Their faces were frozen in a grimace of horror. Well, it's part of the program. Everybody gets t-shirts on. We're going to go outside and get our pictures taken. I'm not doing that. And then we all get yelled at to put these shirts on and go outside and smile for this picture. You want to guess who was yelling at us? The vice president. Because it was her program at the end of the day, right? And it was safer just to get us to go outside and put on these stupid shirts and smile for a second. Your integrity is not that valuable to you. You work in human resources. It's really tough to be the one to step outside that comfort zone, all right? But the greatest American president of all time, who was, of course, Bill Clinton. Teddy Roosevelt said it best, man, inertia is really tough to stop, but so is momentum. Once you get rolling. Okay? So, for real this time, we're talking about 10 things you can do in your workplace every day to go make a difference, okay? Number one, know thyself. The Oracle at Delphi told us this. The Greeks would say know thyself, and the way that they meant it was, hey, don't believe the hype. People will tell you how awesome you are. Know who you really are. I mean it a little differently. It's really more about understanding your values. So while these things have been timeless and they have stood for a really long, long period of time, it's important that we look at it a little differently and think, what do we need to know about ourselves? What's important to us, right? It's important to understand your own values, your own norms. What are your motivations? Why are you doing these things? What are you after? It's only when you know this stuff can you start to make a difference. Okay? You've got to be willing to speak up. You've got to be willing to stand up. And I know it's tough to be the one that everybody's looking at. Nobody's comfortable getting all that attention. Like me, I'm not comfortable. That's why I'm up here. But it's tough, right? That's that tough road. That's social inertia. You got to learn to step out of that. But to do that, you have to know who you are and what you stand for. Number two, you got to know other people. Right? Everybody's normal until you get to know them. You got to understand other people and their motivation. Right? Back to that whole idea about we hate groups, not individuals. All right? So quick story on this. I worked for a company. I ran a team that had a second team down in Louisiana, down about there. It was a smaller team, and they hated us because they were convinced that we were corporate. We were there to fire all of them, which was true, but we weren't allowed to. So then one day they said, well, they decided they would put me in charge of that team as well. Awesome. So I have to spend my time going back and forth to Louisiana to teach these people what they're doing and try to make them feel wanted. And I turned into this, a bungee boss. You guys ever heard of a bungee boss? Okay, this is how bungee boss works. This is the part where I might die, so stay tuned. Bungee Boss works like this. I work in this office. My team's over in that office. About once a month, I would run down here and I would give them all kinds of leadership, but I would just puke leadership on them, and then I would run back to my office so that I didn't have to deal with them for another month. Whew, made it. But what we did is spend a lot of time with them. We spent money on them. We spent time giving them training and making them feel valued and being around them, and guess what happened? I was no longer part of this group. I was an individual. They didn't hate quite as much. Then we fired them. Another great example, this gentleman, Jackie Robinson. I love Jackie Robinson. I named my son after Jackie Robinson. 66 years ago, this man changed the world, right? Of course, it wasn't just him, right? It's Major League Baseball, the Dodgers, Branch Rickey, all of the other players who are around, Pee Wee Reese, right? But we don't think of it as a group. We think of Jackie Robinson changed the world. Individuals are where we focus our attention. There are people you deal with in your workplace every day. We all know this. Again, keep looking up here. There are people you deal with every day that are difficult, that are tiring, that do not contribute anything to the world. They just take up space and air. Usually they smell like feet, all right? and just so we're all on the same page, let's just call them Chicago Cubs fans. This is the part where I'm normally pandering to the crowd, but let me tell you what. Did you know that all your keynotes have been Cardinals fans this week? Were you aware of that? That's why we're so good. All right. But these are the people we have to get to know them as individuals before we can get past their collective identity, and that's really tough to do, right? But you got to take that time. You got to step out. You got to learn them. Number 3, beware the wisdom of the masses. How many of you worked in an organization where you go to do a project and they tell you, you can't do that, that don't work? There's always those people around. We've tried that already. Can't be done. If you were to go ask these 4 dudes, you cannot get elected president in the United States. Can't be done. Tried it. Didn't work. I like to think I'm not willing to give up on something I haven't even started yet. So, but it's interesting to think about it. If these people are so smart and they know all this, why do we have all these problems? Like, why is stuff so broken if you guys know all this? If you know all this stuff that doesn't work, it seems like you should have it licked, right? Something that's really important about this, all of those things they're talking about, they also have a process equation. And there's a major difference between you doing this and them doing this. You know what it is? It's all of you. That's right. You're the X. You're the difference. Just having that one piece change could be enough. All right, so watch out for those folks. Number 4, beware the wisdom of the individual. Again, I look a little nervously towards the front row. I'm going to tell you that gentleman up front, but I hope you come with me on this. Taking orders can be very dangerous, right? I mean, some people take orders and we love them dearly. They make our lives awesome. I'm so sorry. Thank you. So there was this wonderful experiment Stanley Milgram did where he was talking about how people react to authority, okay? And the experiment is basically set up like this. There's a subject and a learner. By the way, the learner is supposedly a subject, but they're not. They're part of the experiment. And the idea was the teacher, the subject, is going to teach the learner pairs of words. 5 pairs of words, very simple. And then I'm going to give you back one of the words, and you tell me what word matches it. That's the whole thing. But if you get it wrong, you see these little wires? I'm going to hit you with an electric shock. Small one at first, but every time you get it wrong, it's going to get worse. Right? And then there's 2 guys watching in lab coats with clipboards. Now, the only person who's actually not in on the experiment is the person giving the shocks. That's really important to this. Because they wanted to see how far would people go just by following orders, just by listening. All right? The only power the researchers had were these lab coats and clipboards and these phrases. This is all they were allowed to say if the experiment person wanted to stop giving electric shocks. The way these shocks work, by the way, is after 10 rounds, the person on the other side of the wall would start begging them to stop shocking them. After 13 or 14, they would just stop responding. They actually were going 25 rounds. Okay? And so they asked all these great psychologists, said, what do you think will happen? How many people do you think will go through this? And so this was the result. This is what they polled. This was the average. They said, well, we think about 4% of people would keep shocking someone after they've been asked to be let go. And maybe 0.1% would deliver all 25 shocks. A full half of those after the person has stopped responding. The actual numbers, 65% of the people in the experiment delivered full voltage to an unconscious person. Because they were told they had to. Because dude had a clipboard. What's really fascinating about this to me, not one of these people, not one, went and checked on the other person without first asking permission. These were volunteers in a subject, in an experiment. But it's that power of authority, right? That wisdom of those individuals who are telling us what to do. The quote that came back essentially just talked about people don't have, in a lot of cases, the resources to resist authority. We're programmed to follow. So recognize the power of this before you try to break out of it. Think about your workplace. There are people who break the rules every day. How do you look at them? If it's the guy smoking the cigar, and some of you know that looks a lot like John Nicolaisian. I don't think it's actually him. But it's the guy smoking the cigar while filling up his gas tanks. You're going to want to deal with that. This kid down here who does parkour on the maze that I love, right? That's not a troublemaker. That's somebody just thinking outside the lines, right? This, if you can see this, this person's got a key and they're reaching into the locked box to change the thermostat. That's worth the price of admission right there. It's just entertaining individuals, right? People who just think differently. That's not so bad, is it? So how do you deal in your workplace with those folks? How do you deal with people who break the rules because they have great ideas? Number 5, protect dissenting voices. Because it's so lonely out there to be the one on the edge, you have to make sure that the people who are willing to speak up are protected, that it's okay for them to say things. What's really cool is that there's power in that voice, in hearing something. It makes it okay to think it. And once you start to hear the dissenting voices, it's okay for you to dissent as well, for you to give your ideas, for you to speak up. I always say his name wrong, and I apologize, Moscovici. He did an experiment. This is another really simple one. I like simple experiments. On color blindness. By the way, if you've never been part of an experiment, just know, whatever they tell you they're testing, they're not. And somebody else in the room, they're in on it. All right, just know that up front. In this case, he said, we want to test you for color blindness. We're going to have all these different shades of blue. We're going to put them up in slides. And I'll just run through the slides, and you just shout out what color it is, if it's green or blue. Pretty easy. There are people in the room whose job it is to keep saying green. They were all shades of blue, but there are people who kept saying green. 33% of the people in the experiment said green at least once because they kept hearing green. And I don't mean they said blue. No, like green. That's green, right? When it clearly wasn't. 10% of the time overall, somebody said green, even though these are all clearly blue. But because they kept hearing that voice, and there was enough doubt in them to say, maybe we should be listening to this. Maybe it does make a difference. Maybe it's okay. Just hearing a different idea is pretty powerful. So the people who are willing to step out, who are willing to face that social inertia, you have to protect them and make sure that they know it's okay. And they're not troublemakers, right? They're not difficult. They're just different. Number 6, resist peer pressure. No truth that this was taken last night at the bar outside the hotel. I think it's from actually last year's event. Peer pressure is crazy, right? The things that happen in groups and the things groups can get you to do are amazing. If you're going to join a gang, you have got to make sure that you believe in sandwiches and Scooby snacks like they do. If you read anything on gang mentality, you'll recognize that it is astounding what people will go through to get into a gang. People almost die just to get in, to then have the ability to maybe kill somebody else almost. But there's so much power in those gangs. There's so much power in that group identity that they're willing to do it. And for some of them, this is survival. You have groups in your workplace. You have your own little gangs, your own little cliques, right? They're powerful. They're dangerous. You got to understand who they are and what they're after and make sure you're not aligning yourself too closely with the wrong ones. We don't like to sit and be self-critical of our friends, right? That's tough to do. But you have to if you're going to make yourself part of this. Number 7, debug your language. This is a really interesting one to me. I worked with someone who really, really believed in this, and she was very upset about our use of militant language in the workplace. This was her big thing, bullet points. She was like, why do we call them bullet points? They don't look like bullets. They look like dots. Call them dot points. I'm like, that sounds redundant. Couldn't you just call them points? But then she would use like flowers and hearts, and it got a bit silly. But no, bullet points are bad, and you can't say, everything's very violent with our language. And we as a society, we use very violent language. My point of this is the language you're using, as we talked about, has an impact on your culture. Think about the first time you went to work at your current job. How long did it take you to hear words that you didn't understand? How many times did you have to go, wait, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that jargon means. I don't know what these words are that you're saying that are coming out of your mouth. So recognize that, because what that does is it makes people feel out of touch, right? You want people to be included. You want to have the group language. You want to make them feel welcome. That's how you get people into your gang. Number 8, critical thinking. I have often said the one marketable skill I have is the ability to ask dumb questions and then wait for an answer. The power of silence is overwhelming. And when you are willing to think critically about things and to ask questions and wait for answers, it is astounding the amount of information you can get out of a person. Okay? But you've got to be willing to go no to no's and then stand quietly and wait. See, that's just like 3 seconds. That was weird, right? The power of silence is absolutely amazing. If you haven't used it in your workplace, please do. It's astounding what you can find out from people just by asking the questions and waiting for an answer. I worked on a project to fix head count. You guys all do head count perfectly, I'm sure, although no company I've ever worked for did it right. We came in, we looked at it, we said, okay, well, what's happening with our head count? They said, well, it takes us 5 days a month to run head count. Well, let's stop doing that, right? Let's do it better. What are you doing? Well, so we have these Excel spreadsheets, so we have to get the data down from our system, and then we put it in the Excel spreadsheets, and we write the formulas. I said, wait, you write the formulas each month? They said, well, yeah, because then if there was a mistake last month, we don't want it to carry over, so we write the formula again. And then we go through all these permeations and manipulations, and at the end of the day, we have this one sheet that's really, really big. Nobody can read. It has all these numbers on it. So we're looking at this sheet, and I see at the bottom of this sheet, there's this little yellow box that has like 6 things in it, 6 numbers. And I said, why is this box yellow? Like, what is the significance of this yellow box? And they all said, yeah, I don't really know. Now, those were numbers that came directly out of the first import. Nothing had been done to these numbers. They just show up on the back page. I said, okay, well, who is this report for? They said, well, this is for the VP of Finance. I said, well, can we call the VP of Finance? No. I said, why? Because she's a VP of Finance. You can't just call her. I'm like, does she not know how to use a phone? Is it? They said, no, you can't just call a VP of Finance. I said, of course we can. Her number's in the directory. If she's busy, she won't pick up. No big deal. Boop, 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 boop. Call her up. Guess what happened? Of course she answered. She didn't even know the phone worked. She was excited to get a phone call. And I said, hey, we're working on this headcount thing. She's like, yeah, headcount. It's awesome. I said, hey, so this back page, like all these numbers, she's like, oh, yeah, it's crazy how much data's on there. It's unbelievable. Can't imagine what we're doing with it. I said, hey, this yellow box, do you know what that's for? She goes, yeah, those are the numbers I need for my report. I said, what about the rest of it? She goes, I don't know. It's not for me. Oh, I just need these 6 numbers at the bottom. I look at the HR team. I said, what are you doing with it? Who else gets this? No one. We only run it for her. So we stopped. Suddenly we had 4 happy people who didn't have to run headcount anymore. But it all happened because somewhere along the line, somebody needed something different. And then people change jobs. It's a fact of life. And we didn't stop and say, are you still using this? Is this still what you need? It's really dangerous because if it's your job, you're supposed to know that answer, right? It's almost like once you're in the job, you're supposed to know everything that has happened to everyone who's ever sat in that chair and ever will sit in that chair, right? We're not imbued with this wisdom. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to recognize, I don't really know the answer to this. Let's find out together. This stuff is happening in your business right now. I promise you this is happening. Number 9. Tipping sacred cows. Y'all know I'm from St. Louis. We've already talked about this. I grew up in the rural area of the state. Has anyone here actually been cow tipping? Anybody? 1? All right. 2, 3? Wow, really? Okay. For the rest of you, if you're not familiar with the concept, cow tipping is this idea where you sneak into the field at night when the cows are asleep and you knock them over. That's it. That's the whole thing. I mentioned it was a rural area, right? Like we didn't get cable. But here's what's cool about cow tipping. So if you look at the physics of cow tipping, I think they're fascinating. The average cow weighs about 1,400 pounds. The average human is 6'1". The average wingspan, as I think of it on a human, is about 5 feet. We can deliver, on average, 300 pounds of force. Now, if you take the friction coefficient of 0.45, which we use because we don't want the cow sliding, it's not cow sliding, it's cow tipping. We assume the cow's going to stay in place. When you go through the permeation, what you find out is you need about 550 pounds of force to knock over this cow. We can deliver about 300 pounds of force, which means what? It is a team sport. You don't go cow tipping alone. A few other things you should know, for those of you who ever haven't been and have thinking about it now. Cows aren't horses. Horses sleep standing up. Cows tend to lay down. Also, cows are pretty alert. You can't really sneak up on a cow, especially if you've been drinking, and let's be honest, you're not going cow tipping. unless you've been drinking. So it doesn't happen as often as we like to think. But it's a team sport. You can't go knock over cows by your own self. Same thing in the workplace, right? These sacred cows, the things you can't question. That's really dangerous to go in alone, but you have to do it. Grab a partner, okay? When you're going through your budget process and when you're looking for ways to improve your processes, improve your outputs, you look at those sacred cows and think, all right, well, yeah, no, clearly we're not going to cut the budget of schools. We all love schools. Schools are great. But what if, instead of cutting the budget of schools, what if we were able to change the question in such a way that we could actually make a difference without anybody feeling really threatened here, right? That's how we have to think. And that's when we start asking those questions like, well, how many classrooms do we have in all the buildings? Because you're supposed to know that, right? But eventually somebody, well, we've got 1,500. And how many kids do we have? Well, 1,500. Hey, that seems like a lot of classrooms for 1,500 kids. Those are the kind of question cycles you get into, right? But again, this is the really dangerous one. You really want to have a partner when you go into these. Number 10, the last one, own your own story. Joe Gerstadt, who I believe was here last year, was part of Talent Anarchy, fabulous speaker and a fabulous individual. He uses a phrase that chills my spine. He talks about culture not being random, but it's intentional. We build an intentional workplace. We do things on purpose. We don't leave it to chance. The best example I've seen of this is Pedigree Dog Food. Pedigree Dog Food made a commitment to themselves. They said, we are going to be a company of dog people. And not in like a weird Island of Dr. Moreau kind of way, like just people who love dogs, okay? So they actually started asking people, bring your dog to work, bring in pictures of your dog. We want to see all about your dog. Why do you love dogs? They would do this in their conference rooms. Like they start off the meeting, why do you love dogs? And I love dogs because they're pet and you can ride them around sometimes if they're really big. And they actually had somebody that said, I don't really like dogs. I was bitten by a dog when I was a child, so I'm kind of afraid of them. 2 days later, that person no longer worked at Pedigree. Now, they weren't fired. They were transferred over to where the cat people live, I guess. But they recognized this is part of who we are, right? It's on purpose. Pedigree has done amazing work getting involved in Westminster Kennel, right, in doggy dental programs and adoption programs. They are great, and it's because that is who they are. They are dog people. Own what this is. Now, there are ways you can look and see how do we rebuild our culture for this. I lied. There's a little bit of, root cause analysis coming. We can use an effort and impact matrix to look at the parts of our culture and decide where we can have an actual impact. We can use a fishbone diagram to sit and figure out where things go wrong. If you want to hear about these kind of things, 145 in one of the other rooms, come on, we'll chill out for an hour and talk about it. But at the end of the day, we know, looking back at this tool, this Y to X tree, we know what goes into building our world. We know what we can do to change it. Any of you who were lucky enough to come to Marin's session yesterday talking about social media and got to hear the way that the amplification takes place and the way you can reach out across all of these different channels to really build up what you're delivering, it's astounding. I use that word a lot, but it's true. It's astounding the impact you can have just from your own desk. I did lie to you. There's actually 11 things, not 10. So if you put your pens away or if you left early, you're going to miss this one. Here's the last one. None of this may make a lick of difference. You may go do all the right things, and it's still not changed. And do you know why? Because of the F, because of the function, because you don't get full control. And this is the part where people tend to gasp a little bit when I say this. Maybe the problem isn't your culture, maybe the problem is you. Maybe you're in the wrong place. If you feel really uncomfortable every day, that's okay to recognize. If you're in your dream job, if you have found a place where you do what you love and somebody pays you for it and you're good at it, you grab hold with all 4 feet and don't let go. Because all 4, forget it. You grab hold with all 4 feet and you don't let go. But recognize that what you have to make sure is that there is a good match between you and the culture you're trying to build. Because you are that X. You are the most important part of trying to rebuild that process, trying to rebuild that culture, trying to rebuild your output. Okay? No one cares about it as much as you do. And you have to remember that because it's only your commitment that's going to allow you to make a huge difference in the world you live in. Thank you so much, Illinois, for having me back. I love every single one of you. Even the Cubs fans, you're all good people. There, usually that's the part where Marin stands up and starts a standing ovation. She was a little slow this time, so I don't blame any of you.